Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Psych Files. Michael Britt here, and the Psych Files, the show that brings you the latest and I think most interesting research in psychology. So today we are going to talk about whether or not you are a real man, or whether or not we should reconsider what this whole concept of being a real man is all about. So, just one announcement up front and then a bunch at the end of the episode. The announcement I wanted to make was that the Psych Files website, www.thepsychfiles.com, is undergoing a refurbishing. And so by the middle of next week, it will probably look quite different. And the reason for that is that it was my sense that it was getting just a bit too cluttered and complex. And I received a couple of emails, thanks to Beth and Jan, for emailing me to say pretty much your site is complicated. So I'm working with a very wonderful guy named Matt Selznick, Selznick, and he's really great, and he's helping me. We're going to revamp the site with a focus on simplicity. So I think you'll find that it's be much easier to navigate through. Same logo and all that, so it should look familiar, but my desire here is to make it easier for you to find what you're looking for. Again, thanks to Matt, www.mattselznick.com, and we're working together, and we'll have a more user-friendly site for you in about a week. All right, so that's that story, and again, I got some more announcements at the end of the episode. So, as I mentioned at the opening of this episode, one of the things I like to do is to take a look at some of the latest journals in psychology and pull out what I think is interesting. And by the way, if you're a researcher and you've done some research that you think is interesting, feel free to email me and let me know about it. But I found one. It was simply called Precarious Manhood. And the authors are Joseph Vandello and Kenneth Bosson from University of South Florida, Dov Cohen, University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and Rochelle Burnaford and Jonathan Weaver at the University of South Florida. Wow, 4 authors. Great study, appeared in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology in last year. Let's take a look at what's inside of it. Now, what's basically what they're looking at here is why it appears to be that men in many cultures, including the U.S. culture, seem to have to prove their manhood. And this doesn't seem to be the same kind of issue with women. So I've done some really interesting studies. And I guess one of the reasons why it rung a bell with me, aside from being a man, was that, wouldn't you know, it connected with a very good children's movie. A little known, actually, I think. It's called The Indian in the Cupboard. And so if you have kids, it's a good movie, very good movie, wonderful acting in the movie. Essentially, it's about this little boy. Well, he's 12 or something, somewhere around that age. And he gets a cupboard, a little small wooden cupboard for his birthday. And he puts some toys into it, little plastic toys, an Indian, and closes it up. And when he opens it, the Indian comes to life. And so at first, and the Indian's called Little Bear, and I think the actor there, his name is Lightfoot. He was wonderful. And the boy is also wonderful. Scardino is his last name. The Indian at first thinks, because the boy is huge and the Indian is just a very, maybe 4 or 5 inches tall, thinks that the boy is some kind of spirit. The Indian learns that the boy is actually not any kind of spirit, but is just a boy. And so near the end of the movie, the boy has a kind of a dream sequence in which the Indian says to him that if he was the boy's uncle, that he would take him on a walkabout in which he would live by himself and care for himself. And he would do this alone for 1 season. He would live in harmony with nature. And when the seasons change, the boy could come home. There would be a big celebration because he would return to the village as a man. And I remember when I first saw this movie, I thought, it's kind of funny. We have these rituals for men that they have to pass in order to be considered men. And as these authors make a good point, girls and women have other kinds of challenges that our society puts them through. Obviously, we've talked about the focus on beauty, things like that. And I do want to do more episodes focusing on gender differences. Another thing I've been looking at in the site is what are some of the topic areas that need to have more episodes on them. So that's an area I'm going to focus on. But so girls and women have their own, they refer to here as a behavioral mandate. In other words, things that we expect them to do. But one of those for men is that they have requirement to prove that they're men. And in a way, it's kind of funny. I was having dinner the other day, and we were having something that needed barbecue sauce. And I remember saying to my son to try the barbecue sauce, that it would put hair on his chest, only because it was kind of hot. And he's heard that before and rolls his eyes at me now. But the thing is, I would never say that to my daughter. I would never say, here, try this. It'll make a woman out of you. I mean, that's kind of a strange thing. We just don't say that. But we would say that this will make a man out of you, or that this will separate the men from the boys. So in this article, they point to a number of other examples of this. They mentions the Kung Bushmen in the Kalahari Desert in southwest Africa. They must kill an antelope before they're considered men. On Pentecost Island in the South Pacific, men must tie vines to their ankles and jump from tall wooden platforms until they dangle inches from the ground. Amazonian Indian men have to place their hands in a glove filled with stinging, poisonous ants for 30 minutes in order to prove their manhood. They sort of wanted to recreate this in the lab and explore this a bit. First, to establish that it is there. We think that, modern societies, we don't have that problem. They set out to establish that it really is an issue, remains an issue for men. And they did it a number of very interesting ways, actually. So their first study, again, all of this using college undergraduates, our typical guinea pigs for studies like this. They gave them a list of fake proverbs, not unlike the "this will make a woman out of you" one that I just suggested. And so they gave them a little bit of money and asked them to take a look at these proverbs and to rate them in terms of whether they found them, they agreed with them, or they found them easy or difficult to interpret. So, for example, here's one, quote, "Manhood is hard won and easily lost." Now, in one group, you saw that quote, or you read, "Womanhood is hard won and easily lost." Here's some more of them. "As a gem cannot be polished without friction, a boy cannot become a man without struggles." Or you read, "As a gem cannot be polished without friction, a girl cannot become a woman without struggles." Right? So to what extent do you think that's easy to interpret? Simpler ones. "A boy must earn his right to be called a man," or "A girl must earn her right to be called a woman." "It's a rocky road from boy to man," or, again, "It's a rocky road from girl to woman." Okay, so they read the proverb, they rated the scales, rated whether or not they agreed with them from 1 to 7 scale, and clearly the proverbs that included the word man or boy were found to be much more easily understood and agreed with. And that's by both men and women. So again, that is pointing out that that putting woman in these proverbs just didn't seem to ring so well for both men and women. Okay, study number 2. What about this idea that manhood can be lost, as one of the proverbs said there? But womanhood, not so much so. So what they did here to take a look at this is they gave them some rather vague self-descriptions, supposedly. It's all made up by the researchers. And they were about, or supposedly written by, a man or a woman experiencing a difficult point in their lives. And so here's what, for example, the key sentence in these self-descriptions, about a paragraph long, was this sentence. Quote, "My life isn't what I expected it would be. I used to be a man, now I'm not a man anymore." Or, "I used to be a woman, now I'm not a woman anymore." And again, the question was, how difficult was it to understand what the person meant? And how confident are you that your interpretation was what the speaker intended? Also, how unusual of a statement was this? Once again, the statement about losing your manhood, not feeling like a man, was rated as easier to interpret than if it was said about a woman. Okay, study number 3. This one's a little bit more complex, but it has to do, well, let me quote them for you here. It says, if womanhood requires bearing children in the same way that manhood requires certain actions, then an adult female who cannot bear children should be viewed as not a real woman. Does a woman lose status as a woman? More so or less so than if a man is unable to get his wife pregnant. So, participants read either the manhood version of a clinical description, and it went something like this, all quotes here. John is 29 years old. He and his wife have been trying to have children for years, but without any luck. John recently learned that he is not able to get his wife pregnant. So, some subjects read that sentence. Others read this. Danielle is 29 years old. She and her husband have been trying to have children for years, but without any luck. Danielle recently learned that she is not able to get pregnant. So what did they find out of this, having students read these descriptions? How did they react to them? Well, quote here, their results did not support the idea that real women must bear children. It wasn't really that damaging to read about a woman who couldn't bear children as it was to hear about a man who was not able to get his wife pregnant. And Sadad suggested that producing offspring is more often seen as a condition for manhood. Interesting findings here. All right, let's move along in this way. Study number 4. What they did here was, I think, kind of interesting. What if they went a little further than just simply had students read things and give their reaction? Here's a real manipulation. What if they found a way to threaten the manhood of male participants and female participants? In other words, suggest that they do something to suggest that they're less of a man or less of a woman, and then see how they reacted to that. Now, how do you do that? And this is a very interesting study. How can you imagine trying to? The idea is good. I think the idea is fine. How do we get male subjects and female subjects, and make them feel like they're not quite up to the ideal for their gender? How do you do that in some way that it's not really damaging? I mean, obviously you're going to do here a debriefing and all that. Just let them know that it was all fake. Okay, but how do you do this without really upsetting them? Okay, and of course you need to get this by the IRB and all that. So what they did was this. They created what they called a gender knowledge test. 32 questions. It consisted of questions measuring knowledge about stereotypically masculine topics. In other words, how much do you know about sports, auto mechanics, and home repair? And questions measuring knowledge about stereotypically feminine topics: cooking, childcare, and fashion. All right, so you answered 32 questions about your knowledge of various gender-typical kinds of questions. Okay, so you're filling this out. Now what we do is we take the results of the test, but we really don't give you the actual results. Half of the participants received non-threatening feedback. Okay, so if you're a male, you found out that you scored in the 73rd percentile. So you know most of what men know. Okay, that's fine. And if you're a woman, then you scored highly on the gender knowledge for your gender. Nothing unusual there. But the other half, a group of men and a group of women, received threatening feedback. They were told they scored in the 27th percentile for their gender. Okay, so if you're a man, you're told you scored low on the gender knowledge test for men. And if you're a woman, you're told you scored low on the gender knowledge test for women. In addition, just to make it a little bit more powerful than that, the computer, quote, produced a visual scale anchored with feminine gender identity on one side and masculine gender identity on the other side. So you're looking at these results and you're seeing this scale that if you're a man, some of the men, you see your score on the low end there, more toward feminine gender identity. Right? So in a way, when you think about a gender knowledge test, sounds pretty, maybe not threatening, But when you see the scale in front of you and you placed closer to the feminine gender identity side, they were expecting that for men that would be threatening. And again, for women, you would be more towards the masculine gender identity. Okay, how did this affect them? Now, how do you measure this? So you sort of threatened their gender identity here, and you're thinking that the result, if you're right, is that men who have been told this will feel anxious. Okay, well, how are you going to get a little bit more specific there and then operationally define that, which means you've got to measure something here. They decided to give them a word completion task. So, as we can't ask you, do you feel anxious? Doing psychological research, you just can't come right out sometimes and ask people the thing you want to find out because they'll tell you the socially desirable answer. So to get at it, they do something that's not unlike the Wheel of Fortune, which is we give you words with some letters missing, and we see how you fill them out. Now, of course, not just any words like dog, with the D missing. But how about a word like THREA, space? And you'd be asked to fill that out. So THREA. So you picture that one. How might you fill that out? Well, that could be thread, or it could be threat. Right? And threat would suggest that perhaps you're feeling anxious. But of course, they didn't try to assess that with just one word. Here's some more words. STRE blank blank. STRE blank blank. Now, you might have guessed that the anxiety-related word there is stress. Now, I tried to think of what else you could put in there besides stress. STRE blank blank. Because you might say, well, that stress is the only way to fill that out. Of course, you don't want that. Here's one. How about stream? It could be STREAM. Okay, you might say, yeah, suppose. All right, how about this one? Blank blank SET. Blank blank SET. Now, of course, the anxiety-related word is upset. UPSET. Now, what else could that be? Let's see. It could be reset, right? RESET. I'm not sure what else that could be. Let me give you another one. Blank OTHER. Okay, blank OTHER. Well, of course, that could be mother, or it could be bother. Now, here's a couple others. SHA blank E. That could be shape, or shame. Blank EAK. Now, that could be a lot of things. Could be beak, seek, leak. But the anxiety-related word would be weak, with a W. Okay? And finally, LO space ER. The anxiety-related word there being loser. Okay, so it was words like those. So their main interest here is what percentage of these word fragments were completed with these anxiety-related words. Okay, so we're going to look at that. The other thing they looked at, which I think was also interesting, was they asked them, after they filled out these word completions, a couple of questions. Would you be comfortable with your friends learning about your test score and feedback? Okay, how about this question? Would you be comfortable with your family members learning about your test score? Would you be comfortable letting the researchers post your full name and test score on a public website that describes the gender knowledge test? And finally, would you be comfortable letting the researchers print your full name and test score in an article in the university newspaper? It's sort of like, oh dear, very interesting. I never really would have thought about that. And of course, they answered 1 would be definitely no, 2, 7, definitely yes. Well, results as expected. The men who were told that they had a more feminine gender identity completed more of the word fragments in an anxious manner. More anxious words. Women, no difference. So whether they were told they scored high or low, no more anxiety-related words in either condition. How about the answers to those questions about would they be comfortable, about letting everyone in the world know how they scored? Men were less comfortable with the idea of others learning that their test score put them more on the feminine gender identity side. Interestingly, that women did not. So they did not care if their results were made public, no matter how they scored on the test. Okay, finally, they cite a number of good resources that suggest that when you threaten a man's maleness, his gender identity, it results in, or more likelihood, for physical aggression. And it's a very interesting section in the paper here talks about how men tend to use, of course, physical aggression, and women use what they refer to as relational aggression. So when women get mad, they're less likely to get in a fight, but do things like social exclusion, meaning there that women would not talk to another woman or girl that they don't like or angry at, gossiping, and rumor spreading. That's how women are more likely to express their aggressiveness. Okay, so similar to the previous study, bring the men and women in, give them this gender knowledge test, give them the fake feedback about whether they scored high or low, give them a questionnaire. But this time, instead of looking for anxiety-related words, we look at words that might be filled out in a way that indicates aggression. So here's an easy one. GU space. Now, the aggressive word there would be to fill it out with an N, gun. I suppose that could be a T, gut. All right, how about KI blank blank? I know what you're thinking. KI blank blank, well, that's obviously kill. But it could be kick, could be kiss, right? Could be. Blank IGHT. Blank IGHT. An aggressive response would be that is the word fight. Could be sight, right? These are good choices for words. These could go either way. It's only because we know which way we expect them to go that we're seeing certain kinds of words here. Here's a complicated one. B space T space LE. Now that's a real Wheel of Fortune question there. B space T space LE. And the aggressive word there would be battle. What would be a non-aggressive word there? Bottle. No, bottle doesn't work. Well, I'm not sure what a non-aggressive word there would be. But anyway, other words of this nature then. So, they also looked for the relational aggression terms. So they also had words like blank UMOR, and that would be rumor. Could be tumor, right? So these are the words they're expecting women might respond to. They might give these kinds of what they call relational aggression. In other words, if you threaten a woman's gender identity, does she respond with aggression in the way that women typically respond to aggression, which is with relational strategies? Here's one. Blank blank CLUDE. Blank blank CLUDE. Clude. That could be include or, as one might expect for relational aggression, exclude. All right, so what did they find? Once again, men in the gender threat condition filled out those words in more aggressive ways. Okay, and how did the women respond? The threat to their gender identity had no effect on relational aggression. So they were not more likely to fill out the terms with things like gossip or tease. Didn't affect them. That's 5 studies, and they did some very careful research here, all of which supported, to a certain extent, of course, what we have noticed in our society, that there does seem to be a heightened level of social proof for men, that they prove that they're men, that this is expected of them, and that when you threaten a man's sense of manhood, it can result in what is typically an aggressive response for men, which is physically aggressive. All right. Well, that is the study, and I hope you found this interesting. Very good. That's it for episode 87. See you next time on the Psych Files.